Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Pawan Kumar Sadhu. In this video, I am going to explain the file structure of our brand new Angular application that we have created in my Angular setup video. People who did not watch my Angular setup video, I strongly recommend you to watch the same and create your own application. Okay, let's jump onto the Angular file structure. If you remember, we have created our first Angular application by using ng command, ng new command. It has generated lot of files, and this is the path for my application, which is inside E drive and inside my GitHub. My Angular is the application name that I have generated in my Angular setup video. Now let's see what these files are. I am going to open this root folder in the Visual Studio Code, which is the IDE that I am going to use. You can do it in multiple ways. One way is you can directly open the Visual Studio Code and click on Visual Studio Code, go to the file and click on open folder, select your own project folder, which is inside my GitHub. My Angular is the folder that I am working on, that is my application folder, and I am selecting the folder. There we go. This is the folders and the files which our Angular CLI ng new command has generated. When we run ng new command, Angular CLI installs the necessary npm packages and other dependencies in your project folder. You can see all the installed packages under the node modules which I have selected now, which is presented in the root folder of our application. So in the Windows Explorer, if you can see, inside our my Angular, which is the root folder of our application, there is a folder called node_modules, and inside this folder all the dependencies of our application will be presented. These are the dependencies that are required and must ensure to run any Angular application. Let's go to the Visual Studio Code, and by default the ng new command creates the initial skeleton application along with its end-to-end test cases. You can see these test cases under the end-to-end folder, that is E2E folder, inside your root folder of your application. So this is the test cases that has been given by the ng new command by default whenever we created the application. Okay, so this skeleton also gives some initial set of features, kind of welcome application that is ready to run and easy to modify. So the core files of our application will be residing inside this src folder of our Angular application, which is just inside the my Angular application. You can see all this app folder, assets folder, and environments folder, and index.html file and main.ts file. So these are the main things that we will be working on in near future. So these are the files and the folders that we do coding our application. We create the app components, we create the components and directives and services, and everything that we are going to do, we will be doing inside this src folder. This is the most important folder because that is the folder that we will be mostly working on this. As we have discussed in our previous video, in the Angular architecture, we have discussed the root module of Angular application. So if you can see here inside your app folder, there is a file called app.module.ts file. This is nothing but our root module of our Angular application. This is the topmost module or the topmost block of our Angular application. If you can see here, app module or the root module is nothing but a class, a simple class which is decorated with @ng module, that is making this class as a module. We will be explaining what is the directive and what is the decorator in future point of time, but for now what you have to understand is the app module is the root module for our application, and which is the starting point, not exactly the starting point, this is the starting module that will be invoked when we run our application. Inside this ng module, it is taking few parameters, which is the declarations and imports and providers and also the bootstrap. So we will be coming to these things again in future point of time. So what we need to understand here, there is something called app component inside this bootstrap. What it means is whenever we start this app module, it is saying start app module with this app component, that is the child of your app module, and it is the parent-most component of your application module. So whenever we run the application, so it will trigger app module initially, and inside the app module what it will trigger is it will trigger the app component. So app component is the root component for any Angular application that we are going to work on. Let's go and see what is this app component at all. Let me open this app component.ts file. This is the component or the root component of my Angular application. It is having three things. Let's see if you can see here. It is also a class. So first thing you have to understand in Angular is, so everything will be a class, and on top of a class we will be decorating it with some different directives which will make this class functional in a different ways. So here in the app module file, if you see here, it has been decorated with ng module. That is the reason why this app module class has become a module. Similar to that, whereas here in the app component, this app component class has been decorated with @component, that has made this component class as a component, as Angular component. A component is nothing but a piece of view in our application. So it will have its own HTML, and it will also have its own CSS styles, that is the style sheets that we are going to apply for any kind of formats or anything, and it will also have its own logic which will be kept inside this class. All together makes this as a component. So a component will have the TypeScript file where we will be writing our code, the logic of our application, and it will also have a template URL which is nothing but app component.html file. It will have all the HTML code inside this, and at the same time a component will also have a CSS styles that we will be giving in our app.component.css file, or that depends on the particular component. If the component is some XYZ component, we will also create xyz.component.css file. So for every component it is a three files will be there. One is the TypeScript file, and HTML file which is the template, and the CSS file which is the style sheet file. So all these three together will make a component. Okay, so we will come back to this folder, the src folder again. So before that, Let us discuss what are these files: the editor config, git ignore, what is this angular.json file, and what are all these files. Let's discuss about these configuration files. All the files which are just below this src folder are the configuration files which were generated by ng-new command or the angular CLI when we have created the project. Let's see what is this editor config file. The editor config file helps to maintain the consistent coding styles for multiple developers working on the same project across the various editors and IDEs. This file will define a coding styles and a collection of text editor plugins that enable editors to read the file format and adhere to the defined styles. So this file, this editor config file, is basically talking about the consistency of coding styles across all the multiple developers. So in a project, as multiple people will be working on the project and multiple people will be writing the code, so this editor config makes sure that coding styles are uniform across all the developers. So whoever is working on that, so it makes sure that the whatever the rules that we are writing over here inside this editor config. So if you can see, this indent size is 2 and indent style is space, char set is UTF-8. So all these are the rules that we have made across our application, and so that whoever is the developer that is going to develop this application, so that helps the people to follow the same coding styles across all the different IDEs also. Now I am using Visual Studio Code. The other developer may be using some other IDE, but still we have to keep the coding styles uniform across all the project members. Let's go to this git ignore file, the next file. Git ignore file specifies intentionally untracked files. When I say intentionally untracked files, we will be writing, we have a different type of files. If you can see the node modules and ETE files, there are multiple files, but in a day-to-day life we will not be modifying those files. We will be modifying only few set of files. So at the time of check-in, we don't want all these unnecessary files to come in the code changes side. So that is the reason why this git ignore file helps us to whatever the files that has to be ignored by the Git at the time of code check-in, we will be mentioning inside this file. So if you can see here, the /dist folder, the /temp folder, out-tsc, and also the node module. So these are the things that we don't want to see in the code changes. That is the reason why we will keep all these things inside this git ignore file. And thank God the Angular CLI has already given us the default set of these files, even the editor config, even the git ignore. So all the default options are already given by the Angular CLI. So we don't have to do put much efforts to modifying all these files, until unless if you are specific about any file or any folder that you don't want to see inside your code changes at the time of code checking in, then you can modify these files. Or if you want to change any rule, the coding style rule, so whatever the things by default which are coming, if you still want to go ahead and then do some kind of modifications, then only you will be required to go to these files and then do the modifications. Otherwise you don't need to touch these files at all. Angular CLI has given us all the default options by default. We don't have to put much efforts. We can simply run the application and we can simply start with our code changes. Let's go to the next one, and the most important one, angular.json file. So angular.json file contains the CLI configuration details for all the projects in the workspace, including configuration options for building and serving the application, and also the test tools that the CLI is going to use, such as tslint, karma, and protractor. So whatever the thing, so this is related to the angular file, angular.json file. The file itself is saying it is related to the angular CLI. This file will contain all the configurations related to the projects which are under this workspace. If you can see this projects node, this is having my angular as one node. So the reason is, as we have created our application with name my angular, you can see this. In your case it might be different. Whatever the application name that you have given, that will be your node inside your projects. If you can expand this my angular, that is the configurations which are specific to your project, that is my angular project in my case. So this all the options that are being displayed in this that are there in this angular.json file. So all these options are nothing but how this angular CLI is going to use and what are the tools that it is going to be used. So all these options are talking about that only. Let's take an example. If you see the source root is nothing but what are the actual source files where these source files are present. That is nothing but src. As we just discussed about this src folder, all our files, the core files of our angular application will be there in this src folder. And if you see this architect, and inside this architect, build is a command that we are going to run when we want to generate the deployment files or the build files. So whenever we run this ng space build command, that will be used for the deployment purpose. So at this time, all these configurations, whatever there inside this build node, will be taken, and these are the default options. By default it has been provided by Angular CLI. So if you still want to go ahead and do some kind of changes, yes, you are absolutely free to do that, no restriction. Let's take an example here. So the options is the place where we are going to modify, if at all, the changes that we want to implement. So if you can see here, I will go through few options because it is very difficult to go through each and every option. So I take the few main options that we usually make changes. So one thing is the styles. So the styles option is talking about the global CSS file that is required for my application. Here it is src/styles.css file. So if you just open this src folder, there will be a file called style.css file. This is a file that will be where we will be writing our own CSS files which are common for any Angular application or our particular Angular application. So the comment itself is saying that if you can see this comment, you can add global styles to this file and also import other style files also. Okay, so this is the place where you will be writing the default and common CSS classes. Of course you will be having your own CSS file for your own component. So as we discussed, each component will have its own CSS file, but still, if at all we want to have common functionality, let's take a font styles across the application. If I want to make a common style for my header, all the h1 tags, so I don't have to keep that for all the components, and I don't have to place that inside all my component.css files. Rather, I will be going to this style.css file and I will place my all common styles inside this, so that it will be applicable for all my components, not just one component. So at this point of time, I also want to tell you app.component.css file or any component.css file is specific for that particular component. It is not global for all the components. So whatever the styles that you are going to write inside your component.css file, that will be applicable, that will be reflected only for your component. You have to remember this, because otherwise you will be facing a lot of issues. Okay, let's go back to our angular.json file again and see there is something called scripts as well. So this scripts is nothing but, so let's say I want to use jQuery or some third-party library in my application. So in that case, I can directly go and put the file path inside the scripts, so that I will be able to use that third-party library as well. So that is the advantage of this scripts option. So Angular is providing us to integrate the third-party libraries, the third-party JavaScript files, whichever are the custom files, that whatever you have implemented for your own application or the project, you can still integrate that with the Angular application and you can still continue with that functionality. So you don't have to lose your custom JavaScript functions, that whatever that you have implemented or that are there in your application. So you can still go ahead and then use these JavaScript functions by just adding that JavaScript file path inside this scripts array. And I would like to also talk about this main.ts file. So what is this main keyword? What it will tell you is, it is the starting point of your application. It's not the app module. When I was discussing about the app module, it was not the starting module. It is the one that will be invoked, which will invoke my app module. That is nothing but the main.ts file that will invoke my or bootstrap my app module. So how does this application is bootstrapping my app module? Anybody can have this doubt. So this angular.json file is the default configuration file, which will tell you what is your starting point, what is the styles, global styles you want to use for your application, and what is the scripts if you want to use the third-party scripts. So all these configurations will be presented in your angular.json file. That is the reason why angular.json file is the most important file among all these configuration files. Okay, so here inside this main, the value is the path of that particular ts file, which is nothing but src/main.ts file. So if you can see this main.ts file, which is there inside this src folder and main.ts file. Let me open that file. If you can see this, if you just see this, nothing is there except that there is something called bootstrap module of app module. So what we are doing here is, in fact we are not doing, it is the thing that has been given by Angular CLI by default, but still let me explain that. What it is doing is, it is bootstrapping a module, nothing but it is triggering one module. So it is invoking the app module. So that is nothing but your root module, and that is the topmost module of your application. So without this statement, without this line, your application will not run. And these things are mentioned in your angular.json file. And again, you might get a doubt, I don't see any HTML inside my app module. So where is my starting point of my HTML file? So when we talk about the files, I mean single page application or any web application, we need some basic HTML file, the starting page of my application. So what is that file? That is nothing but the index file. Here we also have this index, and the path for this index is src/index.html file, which is also there inside our src folder itself. So let me open that index.html file inside my src folder. See here, the basic HTML, head tags, body tag, everything is there, absolutely there. So this is your starting file of your application, And if you can just observe one statement, app root is not a HTML tag, then what it is? This is your app component which we have just discussed some time back. Let me go to that app component again and see. There is something called selector over here. We just discussed about template URL, we discussed about style URLs, we discussed about the TypeScript file, the class, business logic which we will be writing inside this app component, but we did not discuss what is selector. A selector is nothing but wherever with that selector you can use this particular app component and you can keep it anywhere inside a different HTML file, and with this you can invoke the entire component HTML. The entire HTML component can be placed just with a tag that is the selector of this app component. If you see here in the index.html file, what we are doing, we are just calling this app-root, that is the selector of our app component. Just like we use this HTML tags, we just called it, and all our app component will be placed just inside this body tag. That is the magic of Angular. Okay, now we have discussed all the flow, like from where the application starts and everything. So with this I want to jump onto the different file called package.json file. This is also very important file, so let me explain what this file is. We just talked about the node underscore modules which are necessary to run our application. That is what we have discussed. But how come the Angular CLI knows what are these packages or the dependencies required and why only those dependencies to be installed? That configuration will be mentioned inside your package.json file. The name itself is saying package, nothing but whatever the packages that you require in your application, that we will mention inside these dependencies that I have selected, which is at the line number 13. We will be mentioning all the dependencies that are required for my application. I will mention all these packages inside this node, so that Angular CLI will understand, okay, this application requires these dependencies, and I will install all these dependencies and I will keep them inside node underscore modules folder. That is how Angular comes to know that these are the dependencies that this project requires. So package.json is also one of the most important file in your Angular application. Okay, let's say you need some other different Angular package, the custom package you might have implemented, and you want to use that custom package, the Angular package, in fact it is an npm package, node package manager. So if you want to use that new npm package, how are we going to do that? So we just have to keep another line, and where we will be mentioning our package name, just like this angular/common, angular/compiler. So let's take a case, bootstrap. So we need a bootstrap for our Angular application. So it will have all the CSS files. So I want to use that bootstrap in my Angular application. So this is how. There are multiple ways, but one of the way is like to include that bootstrap package inside your dependencies. That will make you to use your bootstrap CSS classes inside your Angular application anywhere. There is another configuration file called tsconfig.json file. This file contains default TypeScript compiler configuration for all the projects in the workspace. It receives the configuration details for the TypeScript compiler, like allowing the JavaScript files, the location of your files, and also the targeted JavaScript module after compilation to JavaScript. So if you have heard like the Angular is developed in TypeScript, but no browser so far supports the TypeScript execution in our runtime. So everything has to be converted to JavaScript. So this is the file, tsconfig.json file is the one which will have all the compiler options. So how it has to convert and what is the targeted JavaScript framework that it has to convert. So all those details will be presented in tsconfig.json file. If you can just see this, there is an option called compiler options, and inside this there is something called target, where we have mentioned ES 2015, that is nothing but ECMAScript 2015. Okay, so whatever the TypeScript code that we are going to write in our Angular application, that will be converted to JavaScript ES 2015 version. That is the purpose of this tsconfig.json file. It will tell all the details of the compilation, how it has to be done and everything. So if you want to convert to some other different version, you can still go ahead and modify this tsconfig.json file. You should be good. The last one, tsconfig.json file. This is the tslint.json file. Will talk about, it is kind of static analysis tool that checks the TypeScript code for readability and maintainability and functionality errors. So it is specific for your TypeScript language. So what it will do is, it will check for, let's say I don't want a lengthy line and I don't want to log to the console. So all these kind of rules, like you can configure disallow unused variables. So I don't want to see any unused variables. So I don't want to see any kind of unused variables in my application. So what we have to do is, like, we have to set the configuration inside this tslint.json file. So it will throw an error based on the severity, so that it will not allow the developer to keep unused variables or anything like that. So I don't want to have a bigger lines, like I don't want to have more than 120 characters in a particular line. So we can also set that option. So you can just go to this tslint documentation to see all kind of options where we can we can set the rules. If you can just see max line length over here, it is talking about 140. So I cannot write more than 140 characters in my particular line in any of the file in my application. So these are the rules that we will be setting for our own readability and maintainability and to avoid the errors. Okay, so this file helps us to follow the coding standards but that is specific for TypeScript. Okay, with this I will just cover one more file, that is tsconfig.app.json file. It is exactly same as the tsconfig.json file. The only difference is tsconfig.json file is specific. tsconfig.json file is not specific for your application. It is common for all application which is there in the workspace, whereas tsconfig.app.json file is specific for your my Angular application. In my case it is my Angular, in your case it might be a different thing. This also you can just see in this angular.json file. If you can just see this, what is the tsconfig file, that is a compiler file that I want to use for my application, which is just under this my Angular node, that is specific for my application. Here it has mentioned as tsconfig.app.json file. If you have different application, multiple applications, you will have a different node, again something like XYZ, and inside this you might be pointing to your different tsconfig files. Okay, fine. So if you just see this tsconfig.app.json file, it is extending from tsconfig.json file, nothing but. So whatever the options that I am having inside my tsconfig.json file, I also need for my app, whereas I just make some kind of tweaks. So I want to include these files also for the compilation, like you can have this include keyword to include any specific files if you want to include in the compilation, like so whenever you are converting this TypeScript code to JavaScript, you would like to also include whatever the files which are ending with a .d.ts file. So similar to that, you can also exclude, like if I don't want to execute, if I don't want to convert this some particular folder slash node modules, so you can just put it inside exclude, similar to this. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please comment if I require any kind of improvements. That will definitely help me. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.